Welcome back to Elevation Perspective. My name is Mark, joined today by Dan Quinones. We're going to talk Mets baseball today. Dan works for the Brooklyn Cyclones, the Mets minor league affiliate. He also did contribute for the big league club in the playoffs. Dan, talking about the New York Mets.
First off, thanks for having me on.
Of
Exciting.
course.
Love talking baseball. It's an exciting offseason because I feel like there's so many different directions they can go that still they have a good foundation and there's so many different ways that they can build it. It's not like there's one clear path that works and that they need to go. So it's exciting. There's a few different possibilities they can go and they're all fun.
For sure. Fun is, I think, a big key word right now. I think David Stern said in one of his initial press conferences that we really have access to everything right now, both financially. Like when he says something like that, and you think of, wow, every single player here is available to the Mets. And like you said, there's so many different avenues where they can improve. It really excites you as a fan base. But we'll jump right into it. What do you see as the biggest need for this team, who, of course, went to the National League Championship Series? They have 10 players hitting free agency from that team. What's our biggest need here?
I think it's pretty clear that starting pitching is their biggest need this offseason. I know the way the playoffs went, a lot of people think, oh, that one more big bat is really what's going to push them over the top. But just in Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, the 94 starts, 534 innings right there. Like that's going to be really important to replace. And you have Christian Scott already down for the year. So even if they do go get a big bat, it's going to be hard to win if they don't figure something out with the starting pitching.
Yeah, I think internally we look at Kodai Senga, who of course missed most of last year. We're hoping he's healthy, but we probably need a six-man rotation to accommodate him. In the internal options, what are we looking at right now? David Peterson and Tyler McGill at this moment?
I definitely think Peterson and McGill have a good shot, especially after the way they finished the season. In-house just going down to the minor leagues. I do think at some point in this next season we're going to see Brandon Sproat. Just when he started with us in Brooklyn, it was his starts, they were uncompetitive. He clearly was already ready to be a step above. I know he was good in Binghamton, Syracuse, maybe a little regression, but I do think it won't be long next year before we see him in the major leagues.
They probably won't be too aggressive with him and give him the spot out of the gates. We're probably looking more of like a May, June situation there. But I think you're definitely right. The other part here with that six-man rotation, they're probably going to use to accommodate Kodai. It'll help out guys like Spro manage their innings. You can pitch this guy once a week instead of sometimes getting a two-star week. Sometimes those innings really pile up. So that is a potential way that I think Stearns and the Mets will look at saving these guys, saving their bullets, and hopefully keeping them healthy.
Agreed. That's one thing is we saw it this year. I mean, with all the guys they signed last offseason, there were guys that were maybe coming off injuries or didn't have the seasons that they had been accustomed to before, and they basically carried the rotation. But towards the end, you can tell they were hitting that gap where it's like they're reaching innings that they haven't pitched in years, and you can kind of see where they hit that wall and there's that regression. So it's definitely going to help them in the long term. They can find a way to manage the innings without sacrificing the talent or sacrificing the pitching depth.
For sure. You mentioned those three big free agent starting pitchers there, Manaea, Severino, and Quintana. Two of those players got the qualifying offer. Of course, Quintana did not. Do you see two of these guys coming back, one of these guys coming back? Of course, we're still waiting to hear. I think it's pretty much a clear, self-explanatory thing that Manaea is going to decline the qualifying offer, but
Right.
still Severino may accept it. And of course, Quintana, I think they'll at least talk to him, but it remains to be seen if they'll try to bring him back.
Right. I don't think there's any world where Manaea does it all the season he just had, and nor should he,
Yeah.
honestly. Severino becomes a little more of a question mark because you would think a guy like that who had so much success, although it's been a few years now, you'd think maybe he wants to decline and in his head he's like, I just proved I'm back. Or you think, hey, 1 year of that salary, if I can do this again, then I can really look at a good payday in a year. So Sevi is where I get a little more iffy, but Manaea, I think we can both agree, no way. I definitely want Manaea back, and I think any Met fan who says otherwise is you gotta ask why. Um, Quintana, I think it was a good run and amazing finish, but it's probably time to move on to some more youth. Severino, same as a qualifying offer. That's where it gets a little dicey because, like we said, there's between those three, that's a lot of starts you need to make up for. You're already down to Christian Scott. You don't want to rush Brandon Sproat. So we know Severino's comfortable in New York. I mean, how many times did he have to say it when he went from the Yankees to the Mets that he's so happy he got to stay in New York? I definitely would not be upset if he ended up back with the Mets. I don't think it's a sure thing. I can see another team who's maybe a little more desperate for pitching being willing to give him more money. But if it works out where Sevy could stay with the Mets, I think both sides would be thrilled.
I want to play devil's advocate there with Sean Manaea. Of course, any Mets fan, like you said, loved him this year. He pitched like a true number one. He had that arm slot change. Of course, it was very well widely talked about. He did more of a Chris Sale like slot change. I know there's some concerns there health wise, changing your arm angle like that for a long term. And Manaea here, you're probably looking at a 3 or a 4 year deal at least, I would say. Is there any concerns there long term of him replicating this kind of performance?
I mean, a guy that kind of steps up to that level from where he was, I feel like there will always be concerns of is this repeatable? Even for a guy towards the end, like we said, he hit the innings wall in the postseason while playing the Phillies and Dodgers.
Yeah.
Anyone's going to struggle with those two lineups, but when you hit that wall, it's tough to really weigh that as a is it a regression in his talent or is it just he's hit the end of his rope and he's out of gas? So there was nothing that I saw personally that would make me worry about him. But like we said, he's a guy that over the last handful of years, he was a swing man. He kind of lost his spot as being a regular in a rotation. So it's scary to pencil him in as like a definite number one, or at least repeat what he did. But I think with the Mets situation, there's no reason not to try.
Good points there for sure. We're definitely in agreement as starting pitching is the number one concern this offseason. Lots of innings to replace, like you did mention. Just in terms of how they're going to get those innings, do you see Corbin Burns? Do you see Max Fried? Or do you think more of like a kind of mid-tier options there, like the Jack Flaherty's of the world? They probably have to bring in at least three pitchers here, whether it's their guys that they have to bring back, or I think three pitchers have to come from outside the organization to come into this flux for 2025. How do you see this pitching staff shaking out?
So I definitely think they will make Mania work. I think both sides were thrilled with the way this year worked. So I think that's an avenue they want to go. Severino, like we said, it becomes a little dicier, but I do think that's a direction that they could go. I think he could be one of the three arms. The big one, I see a world where they make a run for Blake Snell. We saw that they had interests at the trade deadline. Obviously, he didn't get moved, but I don't think David Stearns would want to commit the dollars and years that a Corbin Burns would command. And I think Snell, we saw the track record. He's a two-time Cy Young winner, but we know he has his very high highs and his very low lows. So I think Snell is not as much of a risk financially, but I think the upside is as high as anybody on the market.
Yeah, Snell has phenomenal upside, a true number one when he's going right. Of course, we've seen over the years. Probably last year was more so because of the spring training situation with Boris and everything, where he got a slow start. But we have seen times where he's lost the strike zone, lots of walks. But when he gets locked in, usually in that second half of the season, he is that true number one. And like you said, I think he's probably looking more like a 4 year deal, where Burns is looking more like 7. So I totally think that makes a lot of sense. I can't see David Stearns wanting to commit that 7, 8 year deal to a pitcher like Corbin Burns, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so you're thinking Snell, Manaea, and then maybe like a mid tier. You think more just internal at that point? Maybe Tyler McGill just gets a spot. How do you see maybe one more addition in the rotation coming in?
Let's see. I think Peterson definitely has a good chance at, especially the way he finished the season.
For sure.
If I had to guess, I'd say they worked something out with Severino. I think Christian Scott going down. Obviously, he didn't have as much success in the major leagues, but just seeing what he did last year in Brooklyn, when he is on, he looks like he's as good as anybody.
Mhm.
It wasn't quite the level of Brandon Sproat, but like I said, like last year when we had him in Brooklyn, he wasn't a very high name prospect. But every fifth day, it was like, oh wow, he's shoved again, and it was just good start after good start after good start to the point that you've seen him now. He's made a name for himself. So I think he's a guy that they really could have used this year, but they'll have to find a way to make up those innings.
Okay, so you're thinking bring in Snell, bring back Manaea and Severino. At that point, you're looking at Snell, Senga, Manaea, Severino, Peterson, with that six man being McGill, a kid, some kind of combination of that.
Yes, I
I'm
think
set up for that right now.
McGill.
I think a lot of Met fans do.
Yeah, I think McGill is. I mean, we know he is also a very much his highs are high and his lows are low. Obviously, not like a Snell high and low, but he'll have his games where he goes up against a tough opponent, and next thing you know, it's 6 shutout innings with like 9 strikeouts. So it's very inconsistent, but he has his days where he looks like he could be a real valuable asset.
He definitely has his moments. I still think he's probably more of a reliever long term, but they seem committed on making him a starter at this point. They've had opportunities to put him in the pen. He kind of pitched a little bit out of the pen toward the end of last year, but I don't know. He seems like he never goes away. You know how I feel about Tyler McGill. But
I do I definitely agree. I feel like maybe it's the bias of seeing how good his brother is as a reliever. It makes things like, wow, maybe we should let Tyler do that and see what happens if he could really air it out because the velocity is there, the stuff is there. It's just the consistency is not.
that's fair. Maybe I'm thinking of Trevor where it's like, hey, maybe if he's only pitching one inning at a time, he can get up to like 98, 99 and be more of an impact player. But like we said, he's probably looking at a starter role at least to start this year, just like he did last year. Let's move away from pitching right now, as much as we love talking about it. We have a Juan Soto sized elephant in the room here talking about Mets offseason plans. I think everyone wants this player really badly here. How do you feel just overall about the Soto situation?
I don't want to sound like there's a bias to it, but it's reached a point where it's hard to imagine that the Mets don't just look at him and say, "Hey, what dollar amount will it take to make this work?" and just signing on the dotted line to whatever he says. Because we saw it last offseason, or not last offseason, last trade deadline. Their biggest hole was right field, and they chose to sign a 1-year rental to fill that spot. They wanted to leave that right field spot open. So I think just everything we've heard, all the reports, I think it's safe to say Steve Cohen is as all in as you could be on one player.
We both look at the situation as the Mets being the favorites. It's unclear if that's a bias or not. Just based on everything we're hearing in the media, it seems like the Mets do have the inside path due to the money that Steve Cohen does have. Of course, he could choose to go to the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Blue Jays. We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. If that were to happen, where do you see the Mets pivoting? What's plan B if the Mets lose out on Juan Soto?
So I would hope and I would think that they wouldn't panic into doing something immediately because obviously there's nobody on the market that even is in the stratosphere of a Juan Soto. So my first thought is go to the Padres offering big money for Aaron Judge and then just giving huge money to Xander Bogaerts, who's a good player, but you look at that contract and you're like, oh wow, why did they do that? So I would hope plan B would be wait 1 year. Vladimir Guerrero and Kyle Tucker both hit the market. You have a couple different avenues that you could look at for two middle of the order impact MVP caliber bats. Obviously, Vlad depends on what you do with Pete Alonso, but Kyle Tucker definitely would be a perfect kind of fit if Juan Soto doesn't happen.
It's probably some kind of crime that I've waited this long to bring up Pete Alonso, as you just mentioned. Of course, he also got a qualifying offer. It's such a polarizing player here. You know how I feel about him. I feel like I go pretty wishy washy on him. I kind of flip back and forth. Do you just think he's? I feel like right now the consensus among Mets fans is he's going to come back. I don't know why. I just feel like everyone just feels like it's going to
Mhm.
work itself out. He'll be back with the Mets, and I don't know if that's elation. I don't know if that's excitement. It's kind of just like, yeah, Pete will come back. It'll be good. It's whatever. How do you feel about the whole Pete situation right now?
I definitely think after the postseason that he had, vibes are high. It was like just it's like, oh, he'll come back. Like how great he finished, even though as season was wearing on, more people's like, all right, like let's get this over with and be on your way. So I've definitely seen it go both ways. I think he'll be back. I just think even at his worst, he's still a near 800 OPS. Mid 30s homers is his low. Um, does his game have flaws? Absolutely. His defense, there's a lot of holes in the defense, but the one thing that he does incredibly well, picking bad throws and fielding at first base, that's probably what he does the most of.
Mhm.
Like your first baseman is going to be fielding throws a lot more often than he's going to be fielding balls to his backhand or in the hole. So even though his defense is flawed, there is value to his defense, the part that he does do really well. You would hope that the regression, obviously the last 2 years he's gone backwards. You would hope this doesn't become a full-time thing because it's two different kinds of regression. We saw him in 23. The average was down to what, 210 ish, but he still had that
The power
40
was there.
something homer power. This year, the average took a turn in the right direction, but the home runs, he ended up with 34 home runs this year. So you wonder if it's a regression in skill or if it's just a mental thing where he's too focused on one thing versus the other. We've definitely seen players whose contract years, there's some guys who they all out, get the big payday, but there's some guys you can tell it takes a mental, like it really does a number on them, and you can tell in their play.
It
So
looked
you
like he
wonder if
was
that's
pressing a lot throughout the year. I
mhm,
think many times the commentators brought that up. Gary Keith and Rob would say something like that. They kind of everyone just kind of was waiting for the explosion. Everyone was like, he's going to go on that run where he carries this team, and it never happened. He was always just kind of consistently average. He never really got hot, never really got going. But I think everything you said makes a lot of sense. I just want to hit you. I want to ask you a number. How many years do you think Pete Alonso signs for?
I would say 5.
I would be okay with that. I think more than five, I'm uncomfortable. I think five
Right.
years, cool with me. Let's bring Pete back. Let's work it out. I'm game.
Yeah, I don't think Alonso is a guy where it's like the Soto of where what dollar amount do we do and we'll sign it. I think he's more of a you need to work this out to make sure it makes sense. But again, he played every game, played 162. At his absolute worst power wise, he had 34 homers. That's tough to replace.
We're going to move on here to more of a philosophy question. In the David Stearns regime so far, it's been very small. It's been only a few years. We've not really seen him make an impact, crazy blockbuster trade. Do you see a willingness this offseason of him trading one of those big prospects there, the Jet Williams, Brandon Sproats, Drew Gilberts of the world? Do you think he'll continue to build up that farm system and not touch those top guys?
I do think it fully depends on how free agency plays out. 'Cause in the best case scenario, like let's just say my hypothetical, let's say they do sign Juan Soto and they do sign Blake Snell. There's no real need to move your top guys at that point. You fill your holes. You have your impact pitcher, your impact bat. You can hold on to your blue chip prospects. If those two were to sign elsewhere, maybe it becomes a little more enticing to trade one for like a Garrett Crochet or go find another blank on an impact bat who's available right now because those kind of players don't really become available too often. But maybe it makes you a little more willing. I would say right now, I'd want to say no, but free agency can fully change how that all plays out.
Of course, and like we said, there's so many different avenues this team can look to improve that it really is just infinite possibilities. You said Garrett Crochet there. I think, and I know it's why there was reported right now that he's not available, but Vladdy is probably that other player where if the Blue Jays look at their situation, they lose on Soto, they can't lock up this guy, and they're like, we got to get something for him. I think at that point, you're the Mets. You can offer pretty much any of these guys with the understanding that he's going to sign an extension when he walks in the door. At that point, you're okay with losing any of these players. Garrett Crochet is a little bit more dicey and risky to me, but he was phenomenal. His outlet, his numbers, his Statcast numbers, his under the hood numbers look incredible. Of course, he has the injury history that you got to be worried about. But if it costs one of these guys to get a Crochet, I think you got to look at it.
Right. I think these top prospects, I don't think there's anyone that is just right out of the gate off the board untouchable. I think there's not many players available who will make them willing to trade these guys, but there is that very select few, like a Crochet, who, like we said, his injury history makes him dicey. But when he's on and when he's at the top of his game, he's as good as anybody. So I think he's the kind of player that could really, or like Vlad, like you said, these are the kind of guys that are they could change a franchise. If that kind of guy becomes available to you, then you kind of question which of your prospects you really want to hold on to.
Well, I'll talk about top prospects here. I want to talk about a former top prospect here who has recently graduated kind of the farm system. He's kind of in a limbo here in Brett Beatty. This is a player who was drafted really high. We were really excited about this guy for a long time, had an advanced bat, great skills. Just has not really been able to put it together at the big league level. Of course, then we sent him down. He puts up really nice numbers in AAA. We're kind of concerned he might be a quad A player at this point. Do you think Beatty still has a spot in this organization? Do you think he's more of just he's probably going to get traded this offseason? How do you see Brett right now?
He's in a situation similar to Mark Vientos last year, where you you let him start at AAA. He knows he's behind the eight ball, but you give him a chance to prove himself and see if he can earn a spot. I think, like I said, his swing, the mechanics are top notch. It's a short swing. When he really drives the ball, you can tell like the exit velos are through the roof. He's a guy that there's definitely still a lot of things that you really like about the player, but like you said, it seems like he just hasn't put it together at the big league level. You don't know if it's mental or what could be causing that because there's a lot of things. It seems like he should be doing better than he is, but for whatever reason, he just isn't. So you don't want to move on too quickly, but you also don't want to hold on to him, see him struggle in AAA, and then his diminished value gets diminished even more, and then there's nothing you can even do with it.
He's had a really tough crossroads in his career, I think. The Vientos analogy, similarities there, that's a really good point. I can see that for sure. Where Vientos, we weren't sure if he was a future big leaguer, and now he looks like a building block for this team going forward. I don't want to rule out Beatty, but at that same time, it's really dangerous. It's scary. If you don't trade him this year, it might not be able to trade him again. But he is working on his game. I know. I actually read a lot of reports that he played a really solid second base, which I can't really imagine that in my head, him going over and playing a good second
Yeah,
base. But that's what all the minor league reporters were saying. So I was like, all right, at least he has that avenue as well. They have a lot of
yeah.
middle infielders coming up in this farm system, but another path for playing time. You can't be upset about that. So hopefully Brett figures it out. I think he gets traded this offseason. I really do. I liked everything you said. I don't think it's the right call or the wrong call, but I think something pops up maybe for like a high end reliever, maybe for a back end starting pitcher. And I think he's gone.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either way. 'Cause I saw the same reports you did that the organization was really happy with how quickly he picked up second base. Maybe next spring you try a corner outfield spot and see what he can do there, depending on what happens with a Juan Soto or how they fill that spot. But like I said, you can't be too surprised either way, considering how his career's gone to this point.
It's so interesting because he came up as a bat first guy where it was like, we're going to have to try to find a spot from defensively. It didn't look like he could play a good third. And then last year, he
Mm.
started the year as a third baseman. He played a solid third base. He just couldn't hit. And now we're talking about moving
Yeah,
him to second base and left field, where it's like, that's great if he has more versatility, but he has to hit.
right. It's Yeah, it's a slippery slope. You hope that he can grow and you hope he can finally put it all together. But regardless of what position he's playing, that like you said, that's the most important thing. If you can't hit, it's going to be tough to find a spot for you in the major leagues.
I want to talk about one more specific free agent here in Willy Adames. A lot of reports out there where the Mets apparently are very linked to this player. I don't see a perfect fit here. I know, like, kind of the speculation here is he'll go to third base and he'll move Vientos to first. How do you feel about Willie Adames as a whole, Dan?
So I think I'm in the same boat as you, where I don't see a clear fit, but you can definitely see where there would be some interest because obviously we know David Stearns has a history with him. He's traded for him before, and it worked out pretty well for the Brewers. In this situation, you're probably not keeping Pete Alonso. Adames obviously has the great glove, which is something you don't get from Pete, but he also what did he hit 30 a little over 30 home runs this year, which at his best, the power he is Alonso's worst. So it becomes more of a what fit do you need more? I think Alonso fits better in terms of the just the pure power in the middle of your lineup, where Adames will have his pros, but might not be necessarily what the Mets need. I think he's more of a in case of emergency option.
Yeah, Pete's definitely a better bat, in my opinion. And Adames is just so volatile. Every year it's different. He hit 217 the year prior to his contract year. Now you're going to go out there and give this guy a 6, 7 year deal. I just feel, and play him out of position nonetheless, where I'm sure he'll be fine at third base. I'm not worried about that per se, but it just feels like a bad idea.
There's too much up and down to really lock him in as saying 2024 will be repeatable year to year.
I'm also a little bit afraid, not a lot, but like a little bit afraid of moving Vientos to first base full time right now. I just feel like that's a lot on a player who just broke into the league, had this great year to be like, all right, now you're going to move
Mhm.
positions, full time first baseman at age 24. I feel like we shouldn't really pigeonhole him like that just yet. We can still play him at third, and hopefully he gets better defensively. Maybe long term he goes to first, but right now I just kind of want to see him stay at third.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think first of all, just starting with the bat, we saw what he can do when he puts the work in and how much he can improve year to year. And even his glove. He is by no means a good third baseman, but 2023, his defensive run saved was -4, 150 innings. This past year, he's plays 180 innings, and it's a -6. Still bad,
Mhm.
but clearly a step in the right direction. So I think if you give him time to grow there, you can hopefully see improvement the same way you did with the bat. I just don't think there's a need to move him off third base, so I wouldn't be quick to do it.
All right, Dan, we're going to wrap up here. I want to hear your dream offseason scenario for the New York Mets. We kind of talked about some players you like here, of course, Blake Snell, Juan Soto. Give me just the rundown, your dream offseason.
All right, so the dream offseason is they mainly address their team through free agency. Keep Pete at first, Soto and right, and Blake Snell to the rotation. I would love to see this will not really an off-season move. This is more of a spring training. I would love to see a world where Drew Gilbert has a chance to be your regular center fielder pretty early into next year. They do need to address the bullpen. I don't. I don't think they'll go to I don't think that's like a Tanner Scott kind of sign. I don't think they go to like the top of the top in terms of available arms, but hopefully they can address that one way or another. But yeah, there's a lot of different directions they can go too. That would be equally as exciting. It's kind of how we open the show. There's so many different directions they could go. That would be I mean the word I used before was fun. There's a lot of fun directions they could go.
I think those are really great points there, Dan. Drew Gilbert, especially. David Stearns keeps talking about how he wants these young guys to play. They need the opportunities to play. That's also why I don't really think that he's going to look to trade those players because he wants to replicate the Dodgers. He wants to have a sustainable, successful organization here. He doesn't want to keep blowing it up. He's worked so hard. The whole Mets organization, not just Stearns, before Stearns came in, has worked so hard in building up this farm system. So I don't really see a world where they go and blow it up anytime soon. They're going to keep building this up. They're going to try to build this sustainable winner that they keep preaching. And it's a great time to be a Mets fan. With all that said, that's going to do it for us here. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for
My
watching.
pleasure.